everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a good day. Over the weekend, a new story fell into my lap, and I think it's something that you guys are going to love. But I'm going to introduce it here, and then I'm going to ask that when I upload a video on this topic, that you give it a chance and you give it a watch, because I do think that if you have been interested and intrigued with the content that we've done around numerous churches that take advantage of people, this one will be right up your alley. And it actually involves some dancers that are viral right now on TikTok and Instagram. They're everywhere. They are on Ellen. They have been on the morning shows. They have been all over the place. They danced with Mario Lopez. They were on Ellen DeGeneres last week. This group is being called out for being connected to this really tightly controlled church that's kind of controlling everything. And I have been posting all about it on my Instagram. I have tons of people in the industry that are in my DMs. I've got lots of people that know these people that want all the details out there. We're going to try to get to the bottom of what's going on. So the group is 7M Films, and they are the people that make those dances from throwbacks, like the 70s and 80s stuff where you see them doing the disco dancing. You maybe have seen them before. So that's the group, and we're going to talk about them later this week, maybe tomorrow. I don't know. We'll get to this. But right now I want to talk to you about the outburst that happened in court back in November, because I finally have the transcripts from the November 30th hearing where Jim Bob Duggar testified in court. And I was only able to share with you sort of like the details of what happened in court. I didn't have the transcripts, and now I do. So if you recall, back in November on the 30th, everyone met in court in Arkansas to talk about what kind of evidence could be admitted into court. At the heart of the question was whether or not things that Josh Duggar had done to his sisters would be allowed in court. Part of this included testimony, which included Jim Bob Duggar. There was a lot of news during this time that Jim Bob was defiant, was yelling, was unruly, did not want to answer questions, was very, couldn't remember anything. Well, now we have the transcripts, and I can actually tell you how everything did go down, and it's a lot more clear to me that Jim Bob really did have selective amnesia this day. I remember speaking to someone at court that day, and they just said that they could not believe that Jim Bob was speaking the way that he did. They could not believe how Jim Bob acted towards the judge. And this was because they were going to use Jim Bob as a witness in the trial. And ultimately, his testimony in this specific part of the case ultimately excluded him as a witness because they didn't find him credible at all. The judge said he was not credible whatsoever about what Josh had done. So throughout the testimony, which was to talk about things that Josh Duggar had done, there was parts of his testimony where Jim Bob just simply couldn't remember or was trying to not actually answer questions. So during the testimony, after they tried to talk about like where they were living, what house they lived in, one of the questions came around about what did Jim Bob actually tell the authorities when he spoke to them back in 2006. And during this period of time, Jim Bob actually got super mad at the prosecutors, and this is how it all went down. Whenever Josh came to talk to you about this stuff that he did, where did you live? In the new house or on Johnson Road? And he said, on Johnson Road. And then he'd say, I'd like to say too that you know that this is something for a young man to come forward. And then he said, yes, Mr. Duggar. And he says, but this is a juvenile. So Duggar says, this is a juvenile. And he says, we will, and then the Carly Marshall says, we will get there in a minute. And it says, it was a juvenile record that was sealed. And then Carly Marshall says, Mr. Duggar, if you would just listen to my question, then answer the question that I ask you, okay? That is the way we're not talking, that way we're not talking over each other. And he says, right, but you're taking into consideration that this was a sealed case that was expunged by Judge Zimmerman, right? The judge says to Mr. Duggar, if there is an objection that needs to be asserted, someone will assert it. You need to answer the questions. So he was not wanting to answer very basic questions about where did this even happen? Did you live on Johnson Street? What year was it? Don't you understand that this was an expunged record? And then another aspect was they asked Jim Bob about what he remembered about statements that Josh made and what they did as a family. So they wanted to know how Jim Bob, and Michelle handled Josh's situation. They wanted to know like what steps they took to put into place to prevent the behavior from happening or to protect the girls. And this is what he says. I mean, it's been like 18 or 19 years ago, so I don't remember exactly all the details. I mean, it's been a long time ago. But I mean, there was a kind of sequence that we did as parents, and I mean, we were shocked that this had happened, and we were thankful that he came to us on his own and told us, because he wouldn't have known had he not told us. So my wife and I got together, and we, over a period of time there, we eventually ended up calling the elder of our church, so he's trying to say that Bobby Holt was an elder and so was Jim Holt, and that way basically everything was as elders. He was trying to get their testimony thrown out. And so Carly says, I want to stop you right there. He says, okay. She said, after Josh made this disclosure to you regarding this, did you and Michelle take action in your home to try to prohibit this from happening again? And he said, yes. So you took overt acts. You believed what Josh told you. And he said, yes. And he said, did Josh Duggar come to you again, subsequent in that conversation, after you had put measures in place to disclose that this had happened? And it continued. He said, yes, there was another incident that he told us about at a later time. And he says, can you tell me what that was? Says Carly Marshall. And he says, I don't remember exactly what it was after the first incident. So this would have been the incident that involved Jane Doe, and it involved what happened sitting on the lap. So Carly says, can you tell me? He says, and that it was actually at a point where we called, and then Carly says, and then Jim Holt says, Jim Holt. And he says, so Carly says, let me ask my question and you can answer my questions, okay? Can you tell me what Josh told you? And he says, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he did some inappropriate touching. You don't remember what he told you? What he did to Jane's Doe's 1 through 4? No, I told you he said he had done some inappropriate stuff. I don't remember exactly the wording he used. As a child, he was only 14 years old. What do you remember him telling you? Court says, Miss Marshall, I can't have you all talking over each other. Please watch that. So they were trying to go into this, and apparently they're talking over each other, which is affecting obviously the court reporter. And she said, yes, Your Honor, I apologize. Can you repeat the question? Jim Bob says. What do you remember him telling you in this disclosure that he made? The way I remember it was he touched this area while sleeping, and I don't remember which one or who, whatever, but anyway, but that did, yes. I don't remember which one or whatever. Which one? He called his daughters which one. Do you remember Josh telling you that he had done things in another area? No, you don't remember that. So this is the sitting on the lap again, and he says he doesn't remember Josh coming to him telling this. And he says, do you remember talking to an investigator in 2006 regarding this incident? And he says, well, we did eventually take him to the Arkansas State Police by the recommendation of Jim Holt, again bringing up Jim Holt, and Jim Holt went with me, again bringing up Jim Holt. But in 2006, says Marshall, she says, yes, and I'm not sure when that was. We went and Josh confessed everything to the state trooper, which is not what she's asking about. She's not asking about the state trooper. She's asking about the 2006 report where they actually had to go to the station. And he says, do you remember talking to an investigator in 2006 at the Child Safety Center? And he says, we did go, yes. Do you remember telling the investigator that there was an incident where someone was sitting on a lap? I can't remember. I didn't write the police report, and I don't remember what was stated. And I haven't read that report in years. So then Carly approaches the bench at this point and says, Gelfand doesn't want this to be in this because he says that this report was a tabloid and it has a demarcation on it and that it's inappropriate to use a tabloid in the watermark tabloid report in court. And he wanted this impeached, and the court didn't agree. All that Carly wanted to do was have him read the statement that he made to the police, which explained what Josh had done. And the court actually said, yeah, this is an attempt to refresh his recollection. At this point, it's not being used to impeach him. It's just a document that may or may not refresh his recollection. So she just wanted him to read it to see if he would remember what he said. And so this is where he gets so feisty. It's horrible. And he says, may I approach, Your Honor? You may. I'm going to show you, this is the police report. Do you see this up at the top? Okay, if you're using In Touch magazine tabloid article, are you as your case? The court says, Mr. Duggar, and he says, I'm not going to allow that. Are you allowing that? Mr. Duggar said, I'm not going to allow that. Are you allowing that? The court says, Mr. Duggar, what I'm doing is controlling this examination. The witness says, okay. Duggar says, okay. All right, she's showing you a document and identifying what the document is, and you're being shown, and then she's going to ask you some questions about the document, and if there's a proper objection, someone in the courtroom will make it, but it won't be you. You will answer the questions that are posed. And he says, okay. And he says, did you see this report I'm showing? And it says Springdale Police Report. Yes, with In Touch magazine across the front of it. Do you see the names where it says James Robert Duggar with a birth date of July of 1965? Yes. Is that you? Is that your birth year? Correct. I'm going to read it. Objection, says Mr. Gelfand. I'm going to have to read the paragraph where it's starting, says James said. It says, okay. Will you please read that paragraph? I'm not going to do that. Your Honor. Then his attorney objected and said that, she could show him without having to have him read out loud. And so the judge agreed and said, just let him read it. And Gelfand was concerned that she was asking him to read it out loud. And the court said, no, that's not what I understood. Certainly that would not be appropriate. And then she said, can you please read this to yourself? And he said, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. Does that refresh? And he said, I did not write this report. I don't know what all that was put into that. I don't know who put, I didn't know that investigator. You will have to bring them in and ask them. So he's reading what he says, what he said, what is in the report, what he told the investigators, and he's saying that he doesn't know. And you'd have to ask the police officer. So then he says, does it refresh your recollection as to whether it was, he told you whether it was this specific area between 1 through 4? He said, I don't know. I don't remember. I really don't remember. It's been many, many years ago. And he said, the court said, there's no question on the table right now. Okay. And then she asks again, is it your testimony under oath that the only statements that Josh ever made to you in regards to this was not about what happened below, and it was only on top? And he says, that's all that I recall. It wasn't even a big part in your life that stands out to you. That's all that I recall. May I have a moment, Your Honor? You may. Mr. Duggar, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you recall doing an interview with Megyn Kelly in 2015. Yes. Do you recall telling her that something happened in 2003 that pulled Josh out of the home? I don't remember exactly what I said, but there was a point where we did say that, yes, pull Josh out of the home. Why? Are we talking... After talking to Jim Holt, we were working at Piney Ridge, and he was a chaplain at Piney Ridge, which is a juvenile offender facility. And he was an elder at our church, and he counseled with him and Bobby, and then also with Clark Wilson and with another elder in our church. And we felt, so Jim, when I asked him, Mr. Duggar, I'm going to stop you right there. So throughout this time, he doesn't remember what happens to his girls. He doesn't recall what happens. He can't remember what he said on Megyn Kelly. He tells them that he's not going to allow this in the court. He doesn't remember basics of what happened. That is this huge part of the life that went into Josh's situation with his sisters and what happened to his girls, and he cannot remember it. And he can't remember what Josh said. He can't remember what happened. He doesn't know who it was to. Can you imagine a father sitting on the stand and not being able to answer the basics of these questions? The very basics. And all he would call it was inappropriate touching. That was it. Eventually, it goes back and forth to the extent that he will not answer the questions. He will not talk about it. And the court says to him, this is not a debate. Mr. Duggar, I understand this is difficult and perhaps very unfair situation that you're placed in. I'm sorry. And he said, I appreciate that. This is a very different proceeding, a different forum, and I need you to answer questions the best as you can without side comments. Because he got mad that when we went there, it would all be confidential. He couldn't even remember information about his church. Not even his church. Were there church elders? Yes. Clark Wilson, Jim Holt, and Jim Bob Duggar. And also our wives were spiritual leaders too. Have you known him for decades? Yes. Overall, he was thankful that Josh came to him, but he could not remember the basics, and he fought about confidential information being released and tried to dictate what was said. It's pretty alarming to me that overall Jim Bob was on a stand lying that the judge had to reprimand him and that he got into trouble. Seeing it in black and white and seeing what he said and how he acted, it's unimaginable and unconscionable to me that a father would act this way, even if it's your son that's on trial. And if I were his daughters, I would literally want nothing to do with my dad at this point, but that's just me. So I don't know how you're feeling about this, but that's what happened in court. There's lots more to this transcript, but that's what I wanted to go over for today. Jim Bob Duggar couldn't remember the basics and had to get scolded by the judge to comply because he didn't want tabloids in the courtroom. What are your thoughts about that? Was he lying, or is it as bad as you thought it would be? Or do you think he just didn't want to tell the truth? Tell me in the comments below. Bye, guys.